From the towering boughs of Mirkwood's ancient trees, one could witness the turmoil woven into nearly every nook of the once pristine woodland. Elven sentinels manned watchposts with grim purpose, constantly scanning for signs of intrusion or rebellion. Thranduil, the Elven king corrupted by the One Ring, had turned his dominion into a battlefield of the spirit, pitting loyalists against those who questioned his heavy-handed rule. Though the mighty forest no longer writhed with giant spiders, most had been scoured away in Thranduil's campaigns. An unease far more sinister permeated the air. Ralaeth and his rebel faction, once fighting covertly, had grown bold enough to claim entire regions of Mirkwood's southern borders. They erected hidden fortifications, shielding themselves from Thranduil's increasingly aggressive patrols. Signs of a looming war flickered like embers waiting to burst into flame. Even many loyalists harbored quiet misgivings about the king's reliance on the One Ring and his willingness to crush opposition at any cost. To others, a monarchy that once valued beauty and wisdom had mutated into a machine built for domination. And though that machine was aimed at Sauron and external threats, it seemed equally ready to devour its own subjects. At the heart of the forest, in the torch-lit halls beneath great root arches, Thranduil presided over his throne. Beside him stood his most loyal captains, elves who believed, or forced themselves to believe, that his use of the One Ring was necessary to protect Mirkwood from the looming shadow of Sauron. A mere glance at Thranduil's left hand, where the golden band pulsed with an unsettling light, told them this was no ordinary kingship. And yet, the king had gained an advantage beyond the ring itself. Iacobos, a descendant of Celebrimbor and newly a prisoner, guessed in Thranduil's domain. Though Iacobos came from Lothlorien to aid the Free Peoples, he had been overtaken by Thranduil's forces during a northern push. Now he found himself a reluctant consultant, forced to share his advanced alchemical knowledge in the Elven King's court. In a large, dimly lit chamber that once hosted vibrant feasts, Yakov leaned over a table laden with beakers, crucibles, and half-filled flasks. The air smelled of sulfur and resin, mingling with the acrid tang of smoldering minerals. Despite the intricate runes etched into the table's surface, runes that Yakov normally employed to ward off dark magic, he felt the ring's oppressive presence suffocating every breath. Thranduil stood behind him, a regal silhouette in swirling robes. "You speak of a wildfire," the king said, voice echoing off the arched ceiling. "A barrier that Sauron's forces cannot pass. I have heard whispers of your skill in forging such a flame." Iacovos did not look up from his work. "It is more than mere fire. Think of it as a living inferno that spreads until it burns itself out. It consumes everything it touches." "Precisely," Thranduil said softly. "That is the perfect ward to keep Sauron's minions at bay." His gaze hardened. "You will help me conjure it." Far from Mirkwood's throne room, Sauron's black hordes continued to march from Mordor, his armies feeling endless as they pressed Mirkwood. Scouts whispered that the Dark Lord planned to push north, either through the Brownlands or the Eastfold, to assault Lothlorien and Erebor in a two-pronged campaign. If Thranduil's forces were still engaged in a civil conflict, Sauron could smash them piecemeal. But Thranduil, emboldened by the ring, devised a plan to strike first. If he spread Iacovos' alchemical wildfire along Mirkwood's eastern boundaries, where Sauron's armies might encroach, he could bottle the Dark Lord's forces outside his realm. Thranduil believed that, with Mirkwood secured, he could then crush internal dissent at his leisure. Iacovos stood in moral agony at the center of this plan. He knew that once ignited, the wildfire would blaze indiscriminately, devouring forests, villages, and any living creature trapped behind the blazing curtain. If Sauron's orcs dared cross it, they'd be annihilated, but so too would any innocents in the fire's path. News of Thranduil's plan trickled out through defectors and half-captured messengers. Ralaeth, the rebel scout, took the intelligence gravely. He assembled his fellow insurrectionists in a secluded glade, where mossy rocks formed a natural amphitheater. A single lantern flickered among them, illuminating tense faces. "If Thranduil deploys Iacovos' wildfire," Ralaeth explained, voice carrying the weight of dread, He'll incinerate anything in its path, loyal or disloyal, orc or elf. He sees it as a shield to keep Sauron out, but it could become our doom. A dwarven ally named Bordin, cousin to the famed Dwalin, slammed a fist into his palm. Then we must sabotage it before it's unleashed. If that means fighting the Loyalists head-on, so be it. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. They knew the stakes. The civil war in Mirkwood was about to escalate. Not only would they battle to free themselves from Thranduil's tyranny, but also to prevent the entire forest from becoming a scorched wasteland. 3 days later, Thranduil's loyalists mobilized, forging an intimidating array of warbands that snaked through Mirkwood's winding roads. Their aim? To sweep the rebellious southern sections, capturing or killing those who defied the king, and then proceed to the planned border with Sauron's domain. Iacavos's work was nearly complete. Under duress, he had prepared vast containers of a thick, greenish-black substance, resembling tar but imbued with arcane reagents. With a single spark of flame and the correct incantation, the substance would explode into an unstoppable inferno, crawling across the landscape like a living thing. "You can only direct it so much," he warned Thranduil's leading captain. "Once the wildfire is released, it cares little for friend or foe." The captain, a tall elf with scarred cheeks, shrugged. "Better for us if it devours all foes. If some rebels perish, that's their choice for standing against our king." Iacavos held his tongue, though his stomach churned. He had not seen Thranduil himself in hours, but he felt the king's presence wherever he went. The ring's malign influence haunted him. Meanwhile, Ralaeth's rebels, bolstered by scattered dwarves, men, and sympathetic elves, converged in Mirkwood's southern glens. The civil war had escalated beyond simple ambushes. Pitched skirmishes erupted nearly daily. Loyalist scouting parties fell to carefully laid traps. Rebels swiftly melted back into the undergrowth, striking again at opportune moments. Behind these daring strikes lay a larger plan. The rebels had learned where Thranduil intended to store the wildfire before deploying it. Within a network of old wine cellars, repurposed into munitions caches, Iacavos's carefully brewed concoctions awaited transport to the eastern border. Ralaeth understood that if the rebels could destroy or neutralize the wildfire supply, they might keep Mirkwood from burning to ash when Thranduil gave the order. Dwalin himself, returning from urgent negotiations with Erebor, joined Ralaeth's band. The dwarf's presence lifted spirits. "I've fought orcs in the open, dragons in the mountains, and men with ill intent, but never did I think I'd help elves fight elves." He offered a grim smile. "Let's end this quick, or we'll have no forest left to save." Under cover of darkness, a strike force of rebels led by Ralaeth, Dwalin, and a small group of stealthy elven archers crept toward the hidden cellars where the wildfire casks were stored. Towering pines blotted out the moonlight, and an eerie hush settled over the forest. They moved in single file, every step planned to avoid snapping twigs or brushing too loudly against the dense foliage. They reached a clearing dominated by a mossy stone structure, half buried in the earth. 2 loyalist guards patrolled the entrance, wearing mismatched armor that suggested the king had thrown together any forces available. Ralaeth signaled with a hand gesture, and Dwalin drew a knife from his belt. In swift silence, the rebels seized the guards, knocking them out rather than slaying them. "No point in more bloodshed than needed," whispered Ralaeth, though his expression was tense. They pried open the heavy wooden doors and descended into the cellar's gloom. Rows of enormous clay pots lined the walls, each sealed with intricate sigils that Iacavos had inscribed. The place crackled with an uneasy energy, as though a single spark could end them all. A handful of loyalist soldiers sat at a makeshift table, bored expressions turning to shock as the rebels burst in. The ensuing melee was short but fierce. Ralaeth's archers disabled 2 soldiers, while Dwalin subdued another with a swift hammer strike. The last loyalist surrendered outright, dropping his sword and kneeling. But as they started prying the lids off the casks, hoping to neutralize them or douse them with water, a new threat appeared. A robed elf, eyes aglow with ring-corrupted magic, stood at the entrance. "You fools think to tamper with the king's designs," the elf hissed. With a flick of his wrist, he unleashed a blast of arcane force that knocked several rebels into the cask racks. Clay containers wobbled precariously, threatening to spill their volatile contents. "Stop!" Dwalin roared, charging forward. The robed elf hurled another burst of magic, but the dwarf's momentum, combined with a well-timed arrow from Ralaeth, knocked him down. The intruder slumped to the ground, unmoving. Despite the tense victory, time was short. The loyalists outside would soon discover the incursion. The rebels hastily poured water and sand into the clay pots, hoping to dilute or neutralize the wildfire. As they fled, they tossed torches onto the ceiling timbers, setting the structure ablaze, an ironic but necessary gambit to destroy any residue of the alchemical flame. Smoke billowed into the night sky. Yet the rebels realized this was only one of several caches. The wildfire threat remained. Enraged by the sabotage, Thranduil ordered a grand offensive. Loyalist armies marched deeper into the southern regions of Mirkwood, determined to cleanse the realm of rebels once and for all. Fires flickered among the trees as skirmish after skirmish erupted. The once serene forest turned into a tapestry of blood and iron, with elves on both sides struggling to hold their ground. Among Thranduil's loyal captains was an elf named Fladion, whose unwavering devotion stemmed from personal admiration for the king. Where others might doubt, Fladion saw only necessity. The One Ring was a tool for elven survival against Sauron's inevitable onslaught. His fervor made him a formidable foe, and he led strike teams that penetrated deeper into rebel territory than anyone else had managed. In a brutal encounter, Fladion's band ambushed Ralaeth's scouts, forcing them to retreat in disarray. The Loyalists captured supply wagons and sent a clear message. The king would not be deterred no matter the cost. Civil war raged, threatening to tear Mirkwood's heart out. Meanwhile, Iacavos toiled under Thranduil's watchful eye in another subterranean workshop. Only one main cache of wildfire had been destroyed. Thranduil had stashed more in hidden vaults across Mirkwood. He intended to multiply the stockpile, relying on Iacavos's unique knowledge. "I have heard of the rebels' success," Thranduil said quietly, pacing the edge of the workshop. "They will not succeed again. You will produce an even stronger variant, something water and sand cannot easily neutralize." Iacavos' heart twisted. "You're asking me to magnify devastation that could consume half of Middle-earth's forests. This is not a barrier, it's a catastrophe waiting to happen." Thranduil's eyes flared. "Do you question me, descendant of Celebrimbor? You stand in the presence of one who wields the ruling ring." An invisible force clamped around Iacavos' throat, a show of the king's ring-laced might. The alchemist gasped for air. "Produce the wildfire," Thranduil repeated, finally releasing his hold. "Or your fate will be far worse than a mere civil war." Even as the civil war raged, rumors emerged that Elrond of Rivendell and Aragorn, heir to the throne of Gondor, had received Ralaeth's desperate plea for aid weeks ago. After mustering what forces they could, some from the ranges of the north, others from scattered elven outposts, they were marching east to intervene. Details were scarce, but the possibility of reinforcements kindled hope in the rebels. Dwalin, who had once journeyed near Rivendell, prayed the rumors were true. "We're fighting a losing battle here," he admitted to Ralaeth. "Thranduil's been at this longer, and he's got that cursed ring. We can't hold forever." Ralaeth's eyes were lined with exhaustion. If Elrond and Aragorn truly come, they must not only bring swords and bows, but also a strategy to end this madness. The ring's power is overwhelming Thranduil, and by extension, all of us. As if orchestrated by fate, the rebels discovered an ideal spot to make a decisive stand. Torondale, a broad woodland valley dotted with rocky outcroppings. Streams carved their way through the land, offering some natural defense against Thranduil's approaching battalions. In the gathering twilight, Ralaeth's rebels, now hundreds strong, fortified the valley. They constructed barriers from felled trees, set watchposts at strategic high points, and posted dwarven scouts to watch the roads. The plan was simple: hold Thranduil and force Thranduil's loyalists to either commit to an all-out assault or attempt to encircle them. Yet they all understood that if Thranduil chose to unleash Iachavos's wildfire here, the entire valley would become a firestorm. 2 days later, Loyalist columns emerged from the forest canopy like an unstoppable tide. Fladian led the vanguard, banners of Mirkwood snapping in the wind. Drums beat a slow, ominous rhythm. The rebel archers braced at the barricades, hearts pounding. The battle ignited with a volley of arrows. Loyalist elven archers responded in kind, sending shafts whistling into the rebels' front lines. War cries rang out, steel clashed, and the valley quaked beneath the fury of kin fighting kin. Mid-battle Ryliath glimpsed a chilling sight: a group of loyalists pushing massive carts, each presumably loaded with wildfire containers. If they breached the valley's perimeter, the rebels would have nowhere to run. The entire place would become a cauldron of flames. Dwylin roared a battle cry and led a dwarven surge against the carts, smashing wheels and toppling clay vessels. Some caught fire and burst, sending thick greenish smoke billowing into the air. The fighting descended into chaos. Screams and the acrid stench of burning resin mingled in the thick air. Amid the carnage, Thranduil himself arrived on the battlefield. His regal armor glinted dully, and the one ring on his hand seemed to warp the air around him. A hush fell as his presence pressed upon loyalist and rebel alike. A gravitational pull of raw will. From the corner of his eye, Ralaith saw Iachos, forced to stand at Thranduil's side, hands bound by a strange silver chain. The alchemist's face was contorted with despair and rage, yet he seemed powerless to break free. "You defy me," Thranduil said, voice reverberating across the valley, as if the forest itself resonated with his wrath. "Mirkwood must be secured at any cost, and you sabotage our best defense against Sauron. Fools! You lay the realm open to darkness." Ralaith stepped forward, ignoring the ache of a fresh wound on his arm. "This isn't about saving Mirkwood. You want a kingdom of slaves. Slaves to your ring, to your pride." Thranduil's gaze bored into him, the ring flaring. "Then you and your rebels shall burn." An echoing horn blast made heads turn. From the western approach to Thranduil, fresh troops poured forth. Lithy elven warriors bearing the banners of Rivendell, stern rangers from the north with hooded cloaks, and men of Gondor in shining mail. Leading them was Aragorn, sword in hand, and at his side, Elrond of Rivendell, regal and calm amid the chaos. In the confusion, Iachavos spotted an opening. Elrond's sudden arrival momentarily pulled Thranduil's attention away. Summoning every scrap of alchemical knowledge and stealth he possessed, Iachavos twisted his wrists in the silver chain, pulling forth a hidden vial from his sleeve. With a deft motion, he shattered it underfoot, releasing a potent alchemical blast of blinding light. Thranduil staggered, eyes seared by brilliance. In that instant, Iachavos slipped from his bonds. He sprang away, joining Ralaith and the rebels, and cast a second vial onto the ground near the carts of wildfire. Rather than igniting it, the reagent acted as a suppressant, neutralizing the flammable substance in a cloud of heavy white vapor. The loyalist soldiers scrambled back, coughing and disoriented. Aragorn's cavalry crashed into the valley, hammering Thranduil's flank. Elrond, clad in silver and white, channeled rivulets of elven magic to shield the rebels from arrow fire. Shouts of alarm rang from Thranduil's loyal captains as they reeled at the unforeseen entry of allied forces. "It's over, Thranduil," Elrond's voice carried across the battlefield. "Your realm is sundered, your power twisted by the One Ring. End this needless bloodshed before more lives are lost." Enraged, Thranduil lashed out with a wave of psychic force, sending several of Elrond's warriors sprawling. But the tide had turned against him. Loyalist ranks wavered under the combined pressure of Rebel and Rivendell-led reinforcements, The flame carts, now partially neutralized by Jakovo's quick thinking, no longer posed the catastrophic threat they had moments ago. The king snarled, backing away as his ring-laden hand twitched with uncontrollable energy. The forest around him flickered in uneasy shadows. The civil war had not ended, but the momentum decisively shifted. Rebels cheered at the sight of the new arrivals, morale surging. Amid smoking wreckage and scorched earth, the Loyalists began to retreat, dragging their wounded behind makeshift shields. Ralaeth, panting from exertion, found himself face to face with Elrond. "Thank the Valar you came," he managed. "We'd have been lost otherwise." Aragorn, sweat beading on his brow, surveyed the chaos. "We received your plea too late to prevent the fighting, but hopefully not too late to prevent an even greater disaster." Dwalin clapped Elrond on the shoulder with dwarven gratitude. "You arrived in the nick of time." Nearby, Jakovos knelt, rummaging in his pouches for healing tinctures to aid the injured. The alchemist's hand still trembled from his close call with Thranduil, but determination kept him focused. "We've contained most of the wildfire," he explained to Aragorn, "but there are other caches. If the king gets away and reorganizes, he might still unleash it." Arrows still flew in sporadic bursts across Taurondale. The Loyalist forces were by no means entirely vanquished, merely scattered. Thranduil himself, ring-blazing, retreated behind a cordon of elite guards. Even in his compromised state, the king remained a dire threat. Elrond, keen-eyed, observed the king's departure. "He will not give up so easily. The corruption of that ring will drive him to recoup his losses and rally again." Aragorn nodded, exhaustion warring with grim resolve. "We'll have to press forward, to keep Mirkwood from being consumed by either civil war or Sauron's advance. There's no time to rest." As the battered armies regrouped, a semblance of calm settled over the valley, like the momentary lull in a raging storm. Reinforcements from Rivendell and Gondor merged with Ralaeth's rebels, forging a new, more potent alliance. In whispered conversations around makeshift campfires, they spoke of how to truly end the madness. Could Thranduil be reasoned with? Or must he be dethroned, and the One Ring ripped from his hand by force? Elrond and Aragorn both recognized that a larger conflict loomed. If Sauron's legions were indeed massing just beyond Mirkwood's borders, the Free Peoples had to unite swiftly. This time, they weren't merely confronting a resurrected Dark Lord. They were also grappling with a proud Elven king who believed himself the rightful savior of his realm, no matter the cost. In a quiet corner of the battered camp, Jakobos stood with Ralaeth and Dwalin, gazing at the drifting embers in the sky. The alchemist's voice trembled with fatigue, yet there was a new resolve beneath it. "We must stop Thranduil before he unleashes any more wildfire, or before Sauron finds an opening to conquer us all." Ralaeth nodded, eyes shadowed by the horrors of kin fighting kin. "There may come a moment when we have to face Thranduil himself, and if we do, the ring's power cannot be overlooked." Dwalin clenched his fists, recalling the devastation wrought this day. "Then let's be sure we finish what's started. If we allow Thranduil's corruption to fester, Mirkwood will burn from the inside out."